Bricks and Minifigs is your one-stop shop for all things LEGO. Hit the link below to find a store near you.
Gary Brooks again with yet another battle. um, so I've been wanting to do this particular battle for about 10 years now, the Battle of Leipzig. It was Napoleon's Waterloo before his Waterloo, if you will. What kept me from doing it all this time was a lack of proper uniforms for the Russians. I'm a bit OCD when it comes to historical accuracy. So essentially I wanted it to be as accurate as possible, and I just could not get enough torsos to look realistic for the Russians. So the actor torso is fantastic. That is very good for Russian infantry. The problem is you can only get so many of them. So what enabled me to do this mock this year was the bellhop uniform from the Hotel series. Sorry, the Hotel modular series. And so I was able to get them in bulk, so I'm like, okay, now I finally have my Russians. So for Leipzig, it was the largest battle in history until World War I. And what it was, essentially at its core, was every nation piling on Napoleon after he lost Russia in 1812. So they finally got together and said, we can actually take this guy out, finally, because he's vulnerable and he's weak. So over the last 10 years, he had been able to pick off nations and play them off against each other. And essentially they would get beaten and then weak and wouldn't be willing to participate. And they came at him one at a time or two at a time. After Russia, he was vulnerable enough. Just about all the major nations in Europe went after him. So it was Prussia, Russia, Austria, Sweden, Italy, and of course there was a small British unit here, but they paid for the battle for all intents and purposes. They gave the Allies 11 million pounds, which doesn't sound like a lot, but in its day it was $500 million, which is unheard of. And that enabled armies to properly equip to go against Napoleon. What happened here at Leipzig, though, was he wanted to do one of his final blows. So he's going to knock out the southern army of Schwarzenberg, Austrian army primarily, but it had a corps, von Kleist's corps, that consisted of Prussians and Russians together. And so one of the key points of the battlefield was the village of Probstheide. So I needed a spot on the battlefield that I could show a lot of drama, a lot of effect, that had Prussians, that had Russians, French defending, and no Austrians, because I don't have any Austrians, because the closest thing to Austrian uniform is the chef torso, and nobody wants to see a fat Austrian army. So that was out. So I chose Probstheide because it was a walled village, and the French turned it into a fortress. So that essentially enabled me to kind of select an area. I mean, the battlefield is 40 square miles. It's 500,000 men. I mean, this entire BrickFair would be Leipzig if we tried to do it by space. So by settling on just Probstheide, I was able to kind of pare that down. There was a lot of cavalry exchanges at Leipzig, but I don't have a lot of cavalry, and obviously it gave me an excuse to build some cool buildings, right? The village itself had the half-timber buildings, it had stucco buildings, and so it was a nice mix of that. And the fact that it had walls gave me the ability to go ahead and kind of create that defensive look that you get. And then I get a little obsessed with this. I got obsessed with hedges. So I found a pattern that works really well. And I started to kind of get a little obsessed with them, but they work great. I actually have a little model over here to show how they're built. So this is fairly strong. I mean, it will only rarely fall apart if you abuse it like I just did. So the pattern kind of reinforces itself. It's a good technique. So I like stuff that's not going to fall apart. When my very first convention, I watched a woman spend 2 hours building a tree. And the thing was so fragile, and I'm like, I'm not going to do that. So I'm trying to figure out things that basically are fairly durable. So this particular mock, you might remember Waterloo in 2015 when I did that.
Still one of my all-time favorite builds that I talk to people about still today. Incredible, incredible.
Thank you so much. That's very kind of you. I appreciate that. However, I spent that whole, me and my friends spent that whole damn BrickFair set on minifigs. Okay, that's all we did. So I said, I'm doing another large battle. I'm not going to do that. So this time, all these guys were set up ahead of time. I actually had everything set up and then packed it very carefully so I wouldn't have to do that. And I was amazed. We only had about 1 in 20 casualties that wound up falling over. So we were able to get it up Thursday night or Wednesday night. And we're like, hey, we're done. So that worked out really good.
So you mentioned the Russian uniforms earlier. What are the other kind of groups represented here, and what kind of torsos and minifigures did you use?
Yeah, so there's two different units of Prussians. So you got the Russians coming up through the center. And I'll get to the uniforms in a second. What I like is this gave me the ability to show the different Napoleonic formations. So we'll start over here on the left. These are Prussians skirmishing, right? So skirmishers out front or on the side, basically sniping to annoy the enemy. And they always traveled in twos. Okay, one was firing, and one was loading at all times. This shows the column of infantry moving forward. This is when you wanted to get as many people as fast as possible at a certain point and punch through a point. It was vulnerable to artillery. It didn't allow for very much return fire, but what it did do is overwhelm the enemy at a certain point. So you have that here in the example here. But this, though, was the typical Napoleonic standard advanced attack formation, which was 2 or 3 lines of infantry moving forward in a long line. And some nations broke between companies. The Russians didn't. The Russians were one long line. So with this setup, then, I was able to show all 3 formations, one of the common formations of infantry. Obviously, there's the square, but you would do that against cavalry. No cavalry. As far as the uniforms, that's the bellhop. This is the actor. Very hard to get a hold of. This is the fireman from the old Fireman series.
Like the really old firemen.
Yeah, they came out, they reissued them again, and I was able to get them in large numbers. And so that works really, really well for Prussian infantry. The other uniform that works well for Prussian infantry, and some folks will get a kick out of this. This is pretty funny. Let's go back over to the left. One of our casualties here. The zombie chauffeur from the Monster Fighter series. I was able to get that in bulk, and if you look at it, other than the tear, it's perfect. Color's right, shape's right, decoration's right, everything's right, and the tear can easily be, explained by the fact that they're on campaign and bad things happen. The other units here are the French, of course. So I have various different units of French line infantry, and then finally the Imperial Guard, which we'll talk about in a second. So this is the 28th. They have the old Rebel torso that is very expensive, almost exclusively because of me, ordering them because they are the perfect French torso for line infantry. Add a red epaulet and you're in there. I mean, that's perfect for French. Unfortunately, you can't get a hold of a lot of those. So we have, of course, the Pirates 2 torso for the Imperial guys, and essentially they kind of should have red epaulets, but the bottom line is red epaulets are also extremely expensive and hard to get a hold of. So in effect, then white works too. But the infantry liked to use red as a standout color, especially the French. Of course, the British went all red. So, but yeah, so that's theirs. And then far in the back, what we have arriving here is the guys who have saved the day, if you will, quote unquote, for the French. In this particular point, when the Prussians and Russians attacked, it was brutal. Some Prussian units had 50% casualty rate. They were just about to overwhelm the French line infantry and completely take over the village when Napoleon sent the Imperial Guard in this particular case, the Middle Guard under Friant. And they're top professionals, and they came in and wiped out the Prussians and Russians and completely got the village back. And so the village did not fall. So in effect, then, it was a very successful defense, very bloody, but successful. Unfortunately, of course, the problem for Napoleon is he was already outnumbered 2-1. And he had an urge to, rather than entrench, he wanted that big, bold strike. So right in the middle of the battle on day 2, he sends 11,000 of his cavalry under Murat, charges forward, and he almost wins. there were three emperors then: the Emperor of Prussia, the Emperor of Russia, and Franz Ferdinand of Austria. So all three emperors were in Schwarzenberg's headquarters, interfering, of course, but they were there. And Murat charged forward, and literally his troopers came within 200 feet of capturing all three. If Napoleon had even captured just one of those emperors, it would have been all over, and he would have won. And this world would be a very different world. What happened, though, was there were some Prussian cuirassiers in reserve. They were sent in literally at the last second. They swooped in, stopped Murat, and the emperors were able to get away. That was Napoleon's one great chance to win this battle. That was it. After that, it was a matter of numbers and just being bled dry. So then on day three, at the end of day three, he decides to retreat. And one of the things that Leipzig is known for is the bridge. So basically he's got a huge number of troops trapped in the city of Leipzig in a fortress, about 70,000, and he needs to get them back to France to defend France. But he knew that the enemy would pursue him, so he put a big barge full of gunpowder under the only bridge that was leading across the major river there. And with my memory, I'm forgetting the name of that river, but it's unfordable anywhere else. So one bridge. So about 40,000 get over. Napoleon gets over. Suddenly, a corporal sees Russian cavalry, freaks out, and lights the match. And that barge goes up, detonates, blows up the bridge, and about 500 troops on the bridge, and traps 30,000 French on this side of the river with 30 generals. Many of them try and cross and drown. But the bottom line is the Allies are able to capture that many men, take them out of the action, and that led to Napoleon being very, very undernumbered for troops when he had to defend France. So in the end, then, they were able to overwhelm him. Now, Napoleon fought that in 1814. He fought really hard, and he did really well. He won some battles, but it was just he didn't have the numbers. So it was really here where everything was decided. So I really wanted to do this then, and at least give it some kind of a really good impression of how big that battle was. There is approximately 600 minifigs on this, give or take a few. So, of course, that's not 500,000 men, but it is something.
Still very impressive when you look at everything happening on the layout here.
Yeah, thank you very much. I took the time to make sure that as many of the minifigs as I could set up realistically so that they were actually doing something that it would work, while at the same time preserving the formations, which are all about mass and getting as many people as possible forward with as little chaos. Although it is war, obviously, so there's chaos. So that's why everyone's in a row, because that's just the way that they attacked. That's the way they moved in those days.
So you mentioned the buildings earlier on. Talk a little bit more about kind of the design elements there. What are some of the pieces you used to capture the look of that town?
So yeah, that was a lot of fun. The town is a mixture of half timber and stucco, and so I had my choice, which is nice. And I wanted to go with a little bit of variety and try and look like it was a village, right? That was already there before all this happened. So build a nice, peaceful tavern and inn where people, usually come to drink and eat, and they're fine. And suddenly now it's turned into a sniping position and surrounded. And of course, in that case, though, you're gonna have damage to a lot of the village. As a matter of fact, later that night, the village burned down, unfortunately. So as a result, then I wanted a little bit of variety, but I wanted to be able to display it without having to spend a lot of time. So there's no real interior, and I can show you how I did this if you want to watch. Yeah. No one is going to be impressed by this, trust me. Okay? But, I mean, there's no interior, but hey,
it works.
You got to do what you got to do. It does work.
You got the one French guy just holding it down there.
The one guy smart enough to actually be undercover. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing in there. The other one has floors, but only floors enough for guys to snipe out of the windows, really. So it's not some kind of impressive interior. But it works, though, as far as a display. I really like that the black and white building there, I'm going to keep that one. The rest of this, I don't know what's going to happen, but that building I think I'll keep. So, but it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to build.
When you bring a layout like this, or you mentioned Waterloo, these other really big layouts that you've done, setting up all these minifigures, that's not super easy. That takes time. So how does that work? Do you usually get some other people together and you just kind of all put all the minifigures out? What's that like for you?
I absolutely have in the past. No question about it. I didn't want to do it here at this BrickFair. So I decided to do it at home on my own and modular. So it took a lot of time. It did. But all these are modular. I mean, this is a 48 by 48, the same, and this is 32 by 32, and so they can be broken out and then joined later. There's actually, it's gravity mostly keeping them together with a few plates to make it look seamless. So for the most part, it's very modular, which means then I can set the guys up and then gently covered in bubble wrap in a box. I use a ton of boxes under this table, and it worked. I thought for sure when I got here, half these guys would be mown down, but instead they were pretty tough and resilient. They stayed up. I'm happy. The big casualties from this mock, reddish brown, the deadly reddish brown. So I don't like reddish brown, but it has, this particular village course has a lot of farms, so I had to have farm. So reddish brown. So I had to recover as much of the reddish brown I had out of other mocks. And I would say I lost about 20% in its snapping. And it doesn't snap nice. There's these nasty shards that are absolutely deadly. So apparently Lego has fixed the problem, and it's because I'm using older reddish brown and dark brown. But man, that was it was like I got a pile of casualties at home.
Debris.
Yeah, debris. Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
So this excellent layout here. We of course have a Napoleon movie coming out later this year, so I wanted to talk to you about that, get your thoughts on kind of the trailer so far, and especially how you think they'll handle this battle and what your expectations are for that.
So first of all, it's Ridley Scott. So Ridley Scott directing means automatically that it's going to be a fantastic movie. Gladiator, right? Alien. This guy has created some masterpieces. I am not, however, willing to say it will be historically accurate, because already from the trailer I've seen, there is no way that Josephine ever would have talked to Napoleon that way. Never, never, ever, ever, ever. But bottom line is, though, the rest of the movie looks fantastic, and it's going to be really entertaining either way. And I'm just glad that someone is doing something from that era, because people don't understand how important Napoleon is to history, not just for the French, but everybody. He invented so much. Laws, before he came along, tended to be very local. And so what was a crime in one part of the country was not a crime in another, and vice versa. So people didn't know if they traveled, suddenly they're committing a crime, they had no idea. He's the one who came up with Napoleonic law, that an entire country would have the same law, and that everyone would have, quote, a level of fairness. Of course, it wasn't fair, you know that. So that is one of his most enduring things. Another thing, for instance, I learned the other day that he wanted to find a way to preserve food for his forces. So he commissioned a study to be done, and that led to pasteurization. Now, they didn't call it that then, but it's what it was. It was literally fermenting foodstuffs so that to preserve them. So there's so much of our how we live that was actually affected by him. He was also, he's a villain. Okay, he's absolutely the most classic egomaniac I think the world had seen until World War II. So there's this weird balance. Amazing genius. Our country would not look like the same because he had to sell the Louisiana Purchase, right, to fund his invasion of Russia. So our country would look drastically different.
It wasn't just Europe that was affected by him.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am very much looking forward to seeing how they represent this battle. But they've got to show it because it was essentially his big downfall. And I'm hoping that, I don't know if they will, but I'm hoping they show the moment when, before this battle, the foreign minister, real quick, the foreign minister of Austria spent an entire day with Napoleon trying to talk him into peace. And Metternich said, look at the number of men that your actions have caused to die. And Napoleon literally threw down his hat. I'm hoping that Ridley Scott includes this. Threw down his hat in the room and said, I don't give a blank if I kill 1 million men. I cannot accept a dishonorable peace, quote unquote. I'm hoping that's in the movie.
Well, with that, I think that's a good finishing point for this video. I always love chatting with you, Gary. Your work is always just so incredible to look at. I love the level of research that you do here. So thank you once again for bringing this build out to BrickFair.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity, and have a great fair. This is one of the better ones I've seen.